For every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. That's Newton's third law of physics, for those that don't know. This law is one scientific law of the universe that shows the symmetrical or organized nature of the world we live in. Newton's third law states that one body cannot exert force on another without experiencing an equal force in return. Society works in the same way in many cases. When it comes to foreign policy, there's a term for this. It's called blowback. So, CNN did a report a couple weeks ago after a video went viral online showing black people being sold as slaves in Libya. This new spotlight from the corporate media exposes an issue that other outlets like The Guardian, for instance, have been reporting on since the beginning of the year, some going back as far as 2012, as I will touch on later in this video. In my opinion, I think this is such a shocking story that directly implicates the United States and our NATO allies that a lot of people just aren't talking about it because of how bad it makes this country look. I think a lot of black people are avoiding this topic like the plague because it directly implicates Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton, who was Secretary of State in 2011 when the Obama administration toppled the Gaddafi regime. What's happening in Libya today is the textbook definition of blowback, and yes, it's a racist human rights crisis created by our government. We on the left need to have an honest and frank discussion about Libya, which has largely been forgotten. A number of people on the left were cheerleaders in 2011 when NATO brought down Gaddafi, so I think for some to see how terribly wrong that intervention has gone has caused many to just go silent and act like nothing is going on. Let's also not forget about the fact that we're talking about Africa here, and issues facing African people typically get ignored and played down anyway. I talked about that a little bit in the video I did a month ago about the terrorist attack in Somalia that didn't get enough international attention. Talking about Syria is, quote, I guess you can say maybe more safe, and I'm using air quotes when I say that, if there is such a thing when discussing foreign policy though. Whereas the role the US government has played in what will become a genocide in Yemen and now a new slave trade in Libya just doesn't get talked about because, quite frankly, it's a PR nightmare with no logical excuse. I voted for Barack Obama twice. I want to get that out of the way. But this will not be a favorable video of him or his administration because what they did in Libya needs to be called out. But I did vote for Obama in 2008 and in 2012, and I've mentioned that in the past. But we cannot allow partisan bias and our disgust with Trump blind us to Obama's failings. Okay, I voted for Barack Obama back when I was, in the Democratic Party officially, before becoming an independent. But, we can't allow partisanship and partisan bias to jade our ability to see things for what they are, because if we do, then we are no better than the right-wing sycophants who want to excuse all of Trump's problematic policy positions. Okay, we become maybe not as bad as them, but not terribly different from them either. And, we just be sycophantic in our beliefs about our issues, not their issues. So where the hell do I go with this story? It makes sense to start in 2011 after Muammar Gaddafi was killed, leaving a gashing power vacuum wide open in that country. Since then, Libya has become a huge transit hub for migrants from further south in Africa, from countries like Nigeria, Senegal, Cameroon, Mali, and more, who seek to get through Libya. Okay, so they travel from these countries up through Libya, smuggled across the Mediterranean. So they want to be smuggled across the Mediterranean and into southern Europe in the hopes of finding a better life for themselves. So the toppling of the Gaddafi regime opened the door to the migrant crisis and to the new slave trade that has started in Libya. According to some estimates, as of 2016, over 200,000 men, women, and children, most of them Black Africans, have made it to Italy after going through Libya. It's believed, however, that 1 in 40 have died along the way after sinking in the Mediterranean Sea. So those numbers surely are much higher than what's being reported, though, because that's only based on limited information. Every so often you'll see a story about a boat carrying dozens, if not hundreds, of migrants tipping over, and drowning everyone on board, or maybe it varies case by case. Sometimes people do make it back to the Libyan coast and they're rescued on the coast. But a lot of times, these little boats carrying hundreds of people just tips over and everybody dies. Nearly all of those people are coming through the Libya corridor that was opened up, like I said, after the 2011 NATO intervention, because none of this was happening when Gaddafi was still in power. Okay? A lot of these reports will kind of brush that under the rug, but yeah, that needs to be known. Gaddafi did a lot of things wrong, but one of the things he kind of kept in check was this. The Libyan migrant corridor is so massive, it's being called the largest African migration in modern times, with some estimated 770,000 African asylum seekers trapped in Libya, according to the International Organization for Migration. So this organization, the IOM, estimates that at least 20,000 may be in detention centers controlled by traffickers, extremist Islamic militias loyal to ISIS, or maybe just ISIS themselves, and other armed groups with no judicial process to be heard of. This traffic in humans has created an underground black market cottage industry of sorts, and not just in Libya. If they're able to even make it to Italy, which is the primary destination, they are funneled into literal mafia-controlled migrant detention centers. So you have the armed groups in Libya that are profiteering off the slave trade. It's an all-around clusterfuck. On top of the mafia, which apparently is still an issue. Now, before I tie in the modern slave trade in Libya, I want to acknowledge that even under Gaddafi, certain poor populations in Libya were exposed to modern-day slave-like conditions through mandatory prison labor and abuse of conscription. But even the Global Slavery Index points out that conflict in countries like Libya, since the fall of the Gaddafi government, have done nothing more than increased the population's vulnerability to modern-day slavery due to the increased instability. Okay, so this notion that you can simply topple a dictator to spread democracy is just fundamentally flawed, and that tactic has failed in most scenarios, yet it continues to be a tactic that gets used. This is true especially in Libya. But the reporting on post-Gaddafi slavery in Libya goes back years for some sources, as I mentioned earlier, and you can see how the modern-day slave trade progressed over time. The UK's independent website ran a report October of 2016 about slavery in the central Mediterranean region and quoted workers with Doctors Without Borders, which is a well-known humanitarian organization, which said, quote, Libya's degeneration into chaos following the British-backed intervention to oust Muammar Gaddafi in the country's civil war has left rival armed groups, criminal gangs, and ISIS vying for power, end quote. A few months later, Time ran an article that also touched on the conditions that black migrants faced in the country pre-2011, so pre-intervention. But the article said that they at least had a way to make enough to survive and send money back home, despite facing rampant racism from northern anti-black Arab locals. And don't get me wrong, I've read that under Gaddafi, black people were treated like shit. I mean, the racism was heavy in Libya, even though there was a very large and pronounced native and foreign black population. Okay, there's nothing I've read though that suggests blacks were being traded in open air markets and there were public auctions going on like what's going on today. Like, what's going on today is a whole different ballgame. But even this writer for Time acknowledged the role the fall of Gaddafi played in making the situation way worse than what it was ever before. Now the racism is just on steroids because there's no real government body with influence. So the anti-black racists in Libya openly spew racial slurs at our brothers and sisters and trade them to the highest bidder in the open. This is extremely fucked up, fam. People, this is that old school colonial slavery. This is like that slavery you read about in history books. Okay, so earlier than the Time article, a report from Amnesty International in May of 2015 spoke on how migrants faced rape, torture, and abductions by human and sex traffickers. While the report doesn't mention slavery by name, it points a picture of how bad things were even back then, so bad that it wouldn't be a stretch to say that it was known that this was going on back as at least as early as 2015. Okay, that's not a stretch. Most of the earliest reports, though, of slavery in post-Gaddafi Libya come from mostly online Arab news outlets, not Western. The earliest Western report I could find comes from Newsweek in December of 2012. There might have been earlier reports from Western platforms and Western news outlets. I just, I didn't come across any earlier than this December 2012 article. The writer touches on reports of ethnic cleansing a little over a year after the end of the NATO intervention. So it was coming out soon after Gaddafi's death that blacks were being targeted and imprisoned in what I consider to be concentration camps. The writer uses the term internment camp, but let's not beat around the bush. They were and are concentration camps for black Libyans and black non-Libyans, black migrants. The Newsweek article goes into all of this. Specifically, it says, quote, "One of the most disturbing results of the Libyan revolution was that it was used as a pretext for ethnic cleansing within the Libyan population. According to Amnesty International, during the revolution, 31,250 dark-skinned Libyan Tuaregs, the entire population of the town of Tawarga, were either killed or forced to flee. There are reports that ethnic cleansing continues all over Libya." This was in a Newsweek article in 2012. Okay, so people have been talking about this. It's hard for me to even read this and accept what I'm reading. But I do want to point this out before I continue, that all of the black people in Libya aren't migrants. This is very important for people to understand. You have native black Libyans that often get ignored when it comes to discussions about North Africans. The media likes to play this whole game where they make it seem like all North Africans, including Libyans, are all light complexioned and near white. This couldn't be further from the truth. Black people have been in North Africa honestly since the beginning of time, and at one point in history, especially during the Middle Ages, even dominated the region. But the anti-black racism in Libya was targeted at all black people, okay, native and foreign. I don't know enough about Libyan history to know whether or not black Libyans were treated better than their foreign migrant brothers and sisters. I'm inclined to say probably yes, because typically, even in countries where black people face a lot of racism, you notice that a lot of times the country will treat the native black people a little bit better than the foreign black people. But regardless, the racism our people faced, whether they were native Libyans, native black Libyans, or black migrants, was already there. Okay, it was already in the country. So I'm not saying Obama and Clinton created the social dynamic that has allowed for anti-black slavery to dominate in the country. That element was already there and is built on centuries of ethnic rivalries between different ethnic groups. But their foreign policy decisions damn sure kicked it up more than a few notches. Okay, if we fast forward to today, we see that CNN, the Huffington Post, USA Today, and other major Western news outlets are now becoming hip to what some of us knew about a year after the NATO intervention ended, when some of the first initial reports started coming out. A lot of the recent reporting has come out over the past 2 years. I've personally known about the slave markets in Libya going back earlier than that. I'd say I started hearing about them sometime in 2013, but because I started coming across online posts regarding the human rights crisis that was developing there. I still don't think any of the major outlets covered this story on the cable news channels. Like I said earlier, that video got a lot of attention. That CNN video got a lot of attention, and sometimes what you'll see is these corporate outlets do is they'll see something trending and they want to get clicks, so they'll post something about it on their website just so they can say they're not totally ignoring it, because they know people call them out on that. But it never gets brought up on television. It's usually just buried on their website that has thousands of articles to begin with. CNN ran the initial report of their viral undercover video with Wolf Blitzer, and that was on TV, but it wasn't given major coverage after that and has all but been ignored since then. Well, that's why I'm making this video, because most other people won't. A lot of people are avoiding this, but that's why you come here to this channel. That's why you want to come here to this channel in the future, because I talk about things other people want to avoid, stories that are important and don't get enough attention like this one. So let me go to that CNN report now. I'm going to show bits and pieces of the video. I'm not going to show the whole thing because I've mentioned it a few times already, so I might as well just show it. So here it is. You can find the full video on YouTube, and like I said, Wolf Blitzer did actually show this video on CNN, and there was even some sort of CNN International, like if you even watch CNN International, or if you even have CNN International, the channel itself. That's another way they kind of hide stuff like this. They'll put it on a channel like CNN International, but there was a documentary about this video that was on CNN International with, I think her name is Christian Amanpour or something like that. But anyway, here's the video. Just watch this video and then I'm gonna come afterwards.
A man addressing an unseen crowd. Big strong boys for farm work, he says. 400. 700. 700. 800. The numbers roll in. These men are sold for 1,200 Libyan pounds, $400 apiece. You are watching an auction of human beings. Another man, claiming to be a buyer. Off camera, someone asks, what happened to the ones from Niger? Sold off, he's told. CNN was sent this footage by a contact. After months of working, we were able to verify the authenticity of what you see here. We decided to travel to Libya to try and see for ourselves. We're now in Tripoli and we're starting to get a little bit more of a sense of how this all works. Our contacts are telling us that there are 1 to 2 of these auctions every month and that there is one happening in the next few hours. So we're going to head out of town and see if we can get some sort of access to it. For the safety of our contacts, we have agreed not to divulge the location of this auction, but the town we're driving to isn't the only one. Night falls. We travel through nondescript suburban neighborhoods, pretending to look for a missing person. Eventually, we stop outside a house like any other. Adjust our secret cameras and wait. Finally, it's time to move. We're ushered into one of 2 auctions happening on this same night. crouched at the back of the yard, a floodlight obscuring much of the scene. One by one, men are brought out as the bidding begins. 400. 500. 550. 600. 650. 700. Very quickly, it's over. We ask if we can speak to the men. The auctioneer, seen here, refuses. We ask again if we can speak to them, if we can help them. No, he says. The auction's over, we're told. And we're asked to leave. That was over very quickly. We walked in, and as soon as we walked in, the men started covering their faces, but they clearly wanted to finish what they were doing, and they kept bringing out what they kept referring to in Arabic as al-budaa, the merchandise. All in all, they admitted to us that there were 12 Nigerians that were sold in front of us. And I honestly don't know what to say. That was probably one of the most unbelievable things I've ever seen.
If they don't want to take us to Italy, let us take us to our various countries.
These men are migrants with dreams of being smuggled to Europe by sea.
Excuse me, can I speak more?
We are going inside. Have a seat in your place. Have a seat in your place.
They come in their thousands from Niger, Mali, Nigeria, Ghana. It's hard to believe that these are the lucky ones, rescued from warehouses like the one in which we witnessed the auction. They're sold if those warehouses become overcrowded or if they run out of money to pay their smugglers. Of these rescued men, so many here say they were held against their will. We know that some people are being sold.
Yes.
Some people are being sold. Is this something you've heard about? Can you tell us about that?
Sure.
Tell us.
I was sold.
What happened?
On my way coming, I was sold. Merciless beating. If you look at most of the people here, if you check their body, you see the mark. They're beating with electric. Even your boot, or they took something like a sharp object. Understand? Most of them lost their life there. I was there. The person who came to buy me give the man money. They take me out home. So the money was not even much.
Other migrants now start to come forward with their stories.
They took people to work by force. Even when we are at the seaside, when we are working the work, they will be beating you when you are working the work. I'm doing your work. They will be maltreating us.
CNN has delivered this evidence to the Libyan authorities, who have promised to launch an investigation so that scenes like this are returned to the past. نعم الباغر CNN Libya.
Now, after the video came out and started trending, there was a major protest in Paris at the Libyan embassy, and thousands of people took to the streets. They were there all day, from sun up to sundown. It looked like people were rightfully pissed off, as they should be. France's hands are just as dirty, if not more dirty historically, because France controlled a lot of North African territories. They might have controlled all of the North African territories, if I'm not mistaken, during the colonial age. And they attacked black North Africans all during the age of colonial imperialism. There were several genocides that occurred in North Africa where black people were just massacred by the French and their Arab allies in the region. That's one of the reasons why you don't see more black people in North Africa today as you probably would have seen, 500, 1,000 years ago. But like I was saying, France's hands are just as dirty as America's with regards to everything that's taken place post-NATO intervention. At one point, the police tear gassed crowds of protesters to get them to disperse. Does that sound familiar to anyone? Just a week or two ago, Paris looked just like Ferguson or Baltimore when we protested against state violence in this country. You see, if we are unwilling to stand up to the enslavement of black people in Africa, then that sends a very loud message that we'll put up with damn near anything. That's why I can't just sit by and not address this. Slavery of black people should not be tolerated or just accepted in any way, shape, or form under no circumstances. Recently, the Libyan government has said that it is opening an investigation into the crimes that were exposed by the CNN video, but let's be real, ladies and gentlemen. The chance that the UN-backed government of Libya didn't already know about slave trading in their own country is highly unlikely, because it's just too commonplace. They're only doing this because it was exposed by CNN, even though I've shown you that other outlets have been reporting on this since at least late 2012. So you mean to tell me the Libyan government is just now finding out about it? Come on, let's not buy into that nonsense, folks. The United Nations Security Council is also calling for an investigation, as well as the African Union. You know, I'm just skeptical about all of this because I feel like parties have already known about this, and with the lack of control the central government in Libya has, I doubt any investigation is going to stop this. Stopping this means stopping the migrant crisis, you know, which plays into why so many Africans are trying to get out of like a dozen African countries, a dozen of black African countries, you know, further south to begin with. So you have to stop the migrant crisis from where it's starting, and that's that's basically a continental problem because it stretches from West Africa to Central Africa to East Africa. But then it also requires the curtailing of anti-black Arab racism, neither of which I think the UN or the Libyan government have the capability to do, especially the Libyan government. The Libyan government can barely control Libya, much less influence what other African nations are doing. Now, why did all of this happen in the first place? Of course, we know about the NATO intervention in 2011, but why did that happen exactly? The cover story revolved around stopping Gaddafi from murdering more of his citizens, but I've already broken that down and exposed how much of a lie that is, given how much the conditions have deteriorated in the country since then. So if you were going in with a humanitarian argument, that humanitarian argument has blown up so many ways. It's blown up multiple times. You know, that argument is broken like Humpty Dumpty into 1,000 pieces. A lot of people have speculated, and I think there's truth to this speculation, that Muammar Gaddafi was seeking to create an African currency backed by the gold dinar. It was deemed the United States of Africa, which sounds like a Pan-African dream, you know, that the West was just not going to allow to be implemented. You know, they were going to destroy that shit before it got off the ground. Not to mention, Libya has the largest supply of oil on the African continent. So there's that factor too. So they couldn't have a country like Libya, which was already one of the richest countries on the continent, becoming too independent with as much dominating control of the African oil market as they had. So the toppling of Gaddafi and, you know, his regime had more to do with neocolonialism, surprise, surprise, and maintaining domination over an African nation. It had more to do with that stuff than it had anything to do with humanitarianism. Dead that humanitarian argument. Dead it. Okay, it had nothing to do with why the United States, the United Kingdom, you know, Great Britain, and France collaborated to destroy the Libyan government. Okay, the humanitarian argument was a cover story. I hope, if there's nothing else you take away from this video, you have to get that. Then we have to take into account that it was also purely an attempt to steal the $80 billion of wealth and gold and diamonds that Gaddafi hid in South African banks. In 2013, various factions in Libya began fighting over who had the right to lay claim to Gaddafi's treasures. So don't think plain old theft and resource control didn't play a huge role in the decision to topple the old Libyan government. I'm sure some of that $80 billion has gone to grease all sorts of palms, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of it ended up in the hands of the same Islamic extremists that Gaddafi helped the West to control before they turned on him. You know, because Gaddafi under the Bush administration, so before Obama even came into office, Gaddafi was actually helping the Bush administration. He was helping the United States in the war on terror. That is another fact that just completely gets swept under the rug because it doesn't fit the narrative. We don't know what kind of slush fund Gaddafi's wealth ended up in and who it's been divided between. Anyone who tells you they know exactly how Gaddafi's money has been used is just lying to you. You can simply look at the state that country is in today and see it didn't go to good people and hasn't gone to making the country a better place. It's important to understand that they view the 2011 Libyan intervention as a success. It seems insane given everything that's going on in that country, but it's true. They view that as a success. They toppled Gaddafi by using NATO, and they wanted to take that show on the road and do the same in Syria. People forget this, but here's the twist. Here's what separates Libya from Syria. Russia and China protected Syria in ways they didn't protect Libya. I suppose maybe because Syria held more of a strategic value for them. I don't know. A writer for MIC.com, Mick.com, wrote an article about this in 2013, and I remember people saying things like, well, why can't they just topple Assad the way that they topple Gaddafi? And that's because of the Russian and Chinese protection given to the Syrian government. Okay, that's why. So Russia and China wouldn't allow the United States, the UK, and France to basically do a NATO strike, a NATO bombing into oblivion of Assad's regime the way they had done Gaddafi's regime. So what's happened in Libya from a foreign policy point of view? Well, first of all, ISIS has taken completely over since Gaddafi has fallen. There's been no real spreading of democracy. There is a weak, UN-backed central government that is either complicit or toothless when it comes to combating ISIS and the racist slave trade in Libya. NATO was sent in under the guise of protecting innocent civilians against a ruthless dictator who was attacking his own people. And because of America and NATO's intervention in that country, not only have we made the situation 1,000 times worse, but our involvement can be directly attributed to the rise of a highly racist slave trade by Islamic fundamentalists who have more power in the country now than they've ever had. The Islamic extremists never had as much power in Libya under Gaddafi as they do after Gaddafi. This is not something we can blame on a Republican Congress. This is all Obama and Clinton's doing, and honest people will admit that. I think Barack Obama knows this, which is why before leaving office he acknowledged that his actions in Libya were, quote, the worst mistake of his presidency. While he didn't go as far as to say he shouldn't have used NATO to intervene, he stands by that decision. But Obama says that failing to plan for the aftermath of the fall of Gaddafi was a mistake. And The Guardian quoted him saying that the intervention didn't work. Okay, that is a stunning admission on the part of Obama to basically admit, yeah, we kind of fucked up and made that situation way worse than it was under Gaddafi. Obama has basically all but admitted that publicly. Look, this is worse than people realize. I suspect what we know is only the tip of the iceberg. This is a major reason why we need more international awareness. I covered the story about what happened in Somalia. I'm covering this story about Libya and want to do more because black people aren't just suffering in America, but around the world too. And some of it is because of politicians that we supported in the past. It's just the truth of it. I think it should force us just to think about the importance of supporting politicians who advocate for a more sane and sound foreign policy. And I mean seriously, not just on the campaign trail where they know their pseudo anti-war message will sell. Because people are sick of war, and they know that. But our policy abroad, our foreign policy abroad, has created some modern day catastrophes. And people of color, okay, it's people of color, black and brown people, who are suffering the most. Slavery in 2017, folks, it's real as fuck.